Good afternoon. Thank you all. Thanks to the people in the room and to our online audience for joining us today for this side event in the context of the 50th session of the Human Rights Council. My name is Ole von Uxke, Executive Director of Livelihood, and I want to thank our co-sponsors for the event, UN Women, Kvinna till Kvinna, the Doria Feminist Fund, and Aldepa. And I want to thank the Norwegian Refugee Council for kindly hosting us. And a very special welcome to our distinguished four panelists. Petra, we see you behind us here also as part of the panel. Four women's rights champions who dedicate their daily lives to gender equality. It's an immense pleasure and honor to have you here. 7 years ago, the UN General Assembly adopted the 2030 Agenda, committing to leave no one behind. And among these are women and girls. SDG number 5 is all about achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls, eliminating all obstacles toward their equal access to education, healthcare, decent work, and adequate representation in decision making. And in order to get there, there are 9 targets. And for us to reach these targets, everyone must play their part, from governments to individual citizens. Now we're halfway through to 2030 and we're currently not on track. Given the urgent need for progress, it's time to explore best practices on the ground. In fact, while the right policies must be in place, states must also recognize and foster the hugely important role played by activists. So all the voices you will hear today contribute on a daily basis to the achievement of these targets, first and foremost ending all forms of discrimination against women and girls everywhere, and eliminating all forms of violence against women and girls in public and private spheres. Well, there are many ways to bring about change and progress. We decided to focus on one here today, and that is education. Education has often been identified as a multiplier right, a key driver for gender equality. Education is a broad concept and can take different forms, and it occurs at all stages of our lives and therefore has a multitude of impacts. And today, our goal is to take stock from the experience of our 4 fantastic panelists who all recognize the importance of different forms of education across continents when it comes to achieving gender equality. So let us be inspired by our panel. I will soon give the floor to the 4 of you, and at the end, we also allow questions in the room and questions in our online chat. And in order for that to happen, we will be quite strict with the timekeeping, so please understand that we might have to cut you short if you don't respect your 8-minute allotted times. It is my great pleasure to introduce Ms. Adriana Quinones, Director of UN Women, Geneva Liaison Office. You have more than 20 years of experience in the field of gender equality, elimination of gender-based violence, access to justice, women's economic empowerment, and you've been working intensively, for instance, in Panama, Guatemala, and Colombia. So each year, progress on the SDGs is reviewed by the high-level political forum, and UN Women is tasked with assessing SDG5. Last year's results were not encouraging and concluded that progress has been slow and inefficient. So I'd like to ask you, where do we stand? How far are we behind in achieving SDG5? What trends do we see in countries that have higher education rates for women, especially maybe in terms of economic empowerment? Ms. Quinones, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your commitment to gender equality. I know it's a very busy day, lots of events. Human Rights Council is sessioning right now, and we're very invested that all of the resolutions in the Human Rights Council integrate women's rights. So we're providing data, we're participating in so many different events, but I really want to praise Livelihood for initiating this discussion. Petra, especially thank you for being always a partner to us. I would like to share with you that even though there has been so much progress, especially on education, and we'll have almost reached parity in terms of primary education, the situation of women and girls is yet to improve compared to 25 years ago. And in that sense, I would like to share with you that COVID was a very good window to really understand what structural discrimination is, how far we have really reached, because majority of countries have already passed legislation when violence against women and girls, have engaged in gender equality national action plans for women security. But when we look at the implementation of all these plans, we see that it's only the passing of the laws. These programs have no budgets, they're not being monitored and evaluated, and there's no accountability towards women and girls. So just to name a few of the indicators of SDG5, which involve women's political participation. In terms of parliament, we have not surpassed 35%. Latin America has been at the lead in terms of women's participation. Now we have a lot more to hope for in Australia, for example, with parity legislations that are mandating equal position in cabinets, but we still see a very big backlash for women's political participation. We're talking about human rights defenders, female politicians threatened, attacked publicly, which only makes them want to stop participating in public life. The other issue that I would like to share with you is the issue of time use and how women are investing the majority of their time in the care of their children, the elderly, or the sick. This is labor that is not being recognized. This is labor for which there is no social protection when they are older. And in countries like Guatemala, the time surveys that have been done talk about 6 hours of unpaid labor for women compared to 2 or 3 invested by men. And this is a critical issue that we saw in COVID because a lot of women had to leave the labor market. So all the efforts that were done to include women, to ensure their participation, have been lost because the first ones to be let go were women. Also, majority of women are taking jobs that are more traditional in areas of, for example, as teachers, as nurses, not necessarily in science and technology. So they did not have the skills to stay in the job market, but also they had to go and take care of their families. So there's a very big gap in terms of their participation. We still see around the world, there's a gap in terms of salaries. And it ranges from 10% to up to 35%. And so for equal education, equal work, we are not seeing women getting paid. Violence against women, as you know, is a global pandemic. It only increased with COVID-19. And in a way, it has shown us that all spheres of life, women face violence. So now we see a very worrisome trend of violence against women online, which is a space where women have the opportunity to enter now with COVID, but where explicit violence and attacks have been made, making them quit journalism, work in the environment, as human rights defenders, work for peace. So this is still something where we are lagging behind. And then there, related to education, we are very concerned about what we call harmful practices, which is yet another indicator of the SDG5, child marriage and female genital mutilation. So this impairs the opportunity of women and girls from childhood, and we only see this as a growing trend because as families grow poorer, they are going to marry off their children as a form of social protection. Female genital cutting continues, and there are calculations that it could increase in numbers in spite of everything that has been done. So so what COVID has done is to show us what the real picture is and how, unless we take very radical measures, we are not going to meet any of the SDGs, but in particular the promise of SDG5. I will just say to finish that one of the key enablers for the whole SDG agenda is goal-line. And another one of the key indicators is elimination of discriminatory legislation. Many countries have identified these laws, for example, prohibiting women from working in certain areas, working at night. There are some legislation that we have found where even women are not allowed to be, well, and we have seen it in some parts of the world, to be unaccompanied at certain times of the day. So this all limits the participation of women. And the issue of time use could have a critical contribution if it's recognized and women are supported, for example, with childcare options, with public policies that enable them to go back to the workforce, but especially if men come along, and I'm very happy to see several men here in this event, in terms of childbearing, contributing to the tasks of the household. And we have evidence now in Asia that in those households where men are engaged in childbearing, there is less violence. So to me, gender equality, this goal is all about differentiating both for men and women the results of the agenda.
Thank you so much, Adriana Quinones, for your important remarks and your call for radical measures and your analysis of the implementation gap that still exists. And thank you so much for coming over to share these thoughts with us. I know that because of your very busy agenda also at the council right now, you'll have to leave probably during the event still. Thanks for being with us. And I would now like to turn to someone who has been working to close this implementation gap for her entire activist life. It's my great pleasure to introduce Marthe Wandou, President of Action Locale pour un développement participatif et autogéré, ALDEPA. Marthe is a Cameroonian activist who plays a crucial role in preventing violence against children, especially girls, and the eradication of child, early, and forced marriage in the Lake Chad region. She does this through a sophisticated community-based approach, and for this she was awarded the 2021 Right Livelihood Award. Marthe, you work with women and girls in extremely difficult circumstances, and you have a very extensive and comprehensive approach. I'd like to focus on one aspect for our discussion here, where a key target of SDG5 is to eliminate all harmful practices, as also Adriana Quinones mentioned, such as early marriage and female genital mutilation. You have assisted hundreds of girls in escaping such a fate. So in your experience, how is primary education a game changer in that regard? And what do you do in your daily work to ensure that girls effectively stay in school? And maybe most importantly, what would it take to replicate your approach in other contexts? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ole. Thank you, Right Livelihood, for organizing this event. I hope with my bad English, I will be very understood. As we all know, education is very important, and girls who are not educated are at a high risk of experiencing early marriage, especially from vulnerable communities or families, like in the context of my region, Far North Cameroon. And having also girls in school helps them. For us, I would think, is helps girls to escape from early and forced marriage, because there are several ways. Being at schools, they escape from the eyes of potential perpetrators, because at the age of 11, 12, 13, girls are asked for marriage, and we think since when they go to school, they are out of those perpetrators, and they can have also chance to get role models in school, and they try to build also their mind to achieve also some high steps, and they have opportunities in school to be skilled and also to plan for their life with dignity, with their rights. So education helps also from early pregnancy or sexual abuse, because in some traditional systems like mine, when a girl is abused or she's pregnant, she has to be married to the perpetrator. So it's having her in school is also a chance for her to escape from those situations, but also situations of like they are sent to door selling, where they are exposed to risks for sexual abuse and other violences. And we know that when they are at home, they are more violented. We experience this at the time of we receive refugees or internal displaced people being with their families without not going to school. Sometimes girls were sold to have to make their families having income or having some gifts to survive or to start life. And also during the COVID lockdown, since the classes were locked for 7 months, children and especially girls experience many violences, and those at the age of 10, 11, going on, they were sent to the markets, they were sent to the street to look for means for the families, and from there they were sexually abused. Many of them got pregnant also, and when the class started, they could not go back to school because they were sent to marriage. And some parents also think that since the classes are closed, there is no necessary, it's not necessary to keep the girls at home, so they send them to marry. So for us, we consider education a strong pillar for social transformation, since education empowers people to become effective and productive also members in the society, especially girls. They with their skills, they have better ability, but also strategy to break the silence when they are abused, when they are violented, including also sexual harassment, which is a taboo. And also they can share and have channels of report when they go under violence. Then what we do, we have strategized at several levels, because our methodology is a community-based approach. First, we work in the schools with girls themselves, but also with boys, because we know not only girls, but also boys, to understand what is the impact of early marriage, sexual abuse on the life of the girls, and also the girls to know what impact those abuses have on their life and how they can also escape from it. So we support also children, especially girls, with school materials, school fees, uniforms, exam fees, but also to have a birth certificate, because having birth certificate after some months becomes very, very difficult. And when you get to the end of primary school, you end your education there, because you could not have access to official exams to go to the secondary school, and then you end there. So we do our best to make sure girls at school and other also children have birth certificate, together with administrative procedure, but also sometimes judicial procedure. We train also teachers, because they need to know also the impacts of gender and sexual violence, based violence, on how the impact on the girls, but also how they related to the dropout of girls, because sometimes the school is supposed to be a safe place for children, but also there are the place of violence. Teachers themselves, they harass girls, and from there they escape. So we train them to know how to handle situations, and also to maybe know exactly what can be the first aid they can give to traumatize girls at the school. But also we help schools to have participative code of conduct, so that children and teachers, they can know also how to be together. But also we champion boys to make them being the sensitizer, mobilizer of the other boys mates, and also they can protect their girls mates. At the community, we work on at the level of sensitization of parents to make them understanding their responsibilities, working with traditional rulers, with to build mechanism on the child protection committees, and also to support children with, especially girls with mental health activities. Then also those who drop from school, we support them with professional training. And this is the complex approach we put in our methodology to make sure that children, especially girls, are protected in the school, but also in the communities, in the family, and to make them being at the school. Thank you.
Marthe Wandou, thank you so much for reminding us of the crucial role of primary education in protecting girls, and also how you speak about education as a strong pillar, you say, for social transformation. Thank you for sharing some experiences of your impressive work, and we look forward to hearing more at the end. There may be some questions. It's now my honor to turn to Petra Tötterman Andorff, General Secretary of Kvinna till Kvinna, organization that received the Right to Have It Award in 2002 from Sweden. Kvinna till Kvinna promotes women's rights in over 20 conflict-affected countries through the support of 140 local partner organizations across the world. Your focus areas are gender-based violence, equal participation, women's role in peace and security, and economic empowerment. Now, another target of the Sustainable Development Goal number 5 is to ensure universal access to sexual and reproductive health and rights. Here, education also plays a fundamental role when it comes to a person's decisions over their own body. Sexual education does even more, though. It has a real impact in preventing and addressing violence and discrimination against women more widely. So, Petra, maybe you could talk about that a little bit. How does sexual education really come into play here? How does it affect gender-based discrimination and rates of violence? What role does Kvinna till Kvinna and its partners play in ensuring better rates of comprehensive sexuality education, and what is the gap that remains? Petra, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to take part of this important event, but also making sure that I could participate online. The definite role that education can play for women's rights, whether formal or informal, is clear to Kvinna till Kvinna Foundation in every context that we work. And just like Ola said, we work in 20 conflict-affected countries in 4 different regions across the world. And it's important not only seeing as a multiplier right that can support the achievement of other human rights, but also how when conflict and crisis erupts, girls' education tends to be one of the first rights to be violated. And we see this from Rwanda, where we know that girls are not being seen as able to cross flooded rivers to go to schools, floods caused by climate change. And we know in Afghanistan, where women and girls are being abandoned by the international community as we speak, and are now forbidden by the Taliban to exercise their human right to education. So girls are paying the price for economic inequality and persisting poverty by being forced to work or are married off in child marriages, just as the previous speakers have mentioned. And all over the world, women and girls are paying for crises caused by others with a lack of access to education, at the same time as we know how extremely important and what an incredible tool to girls' and women's education and learning can be. So providing spaces for women to educate themselves about their right is one of the core methods that the Kvinna till Kvinna Foundation is using. And we know how powerful it is to invest in women learning about their rights, creating both a platform, tool, and confidence to influence their societies. And through our work across regions, women activists repeat the importance of having the power to decide over your own body. This is at the center of women's freedom and building true equal societies. And as one young activist in Abkhazia, Georgia, once said, if you can't control and make decisions about your own body and life, then it's difficult to be a whole person. Full sexual and reproductive health and right is a prerequisite for gender equality and for women's ability to take part in social, economic, political life. And comprehensive sexual education is one important step to ensure this. In Sweden, women fought early on to include sexual education in the curriculum, and the Swedish Association for Sexuality Education played a vital role here. In the early 1950s, so quite a time ago, they succeeded, and Sweden became the first country in the world to educate all students about their sexuality. And I would dare to argue that this is one of several key reforms, making Sweden one of the most gender equal countries in the world. And today, many of the world's young, especially the poorest and most vulnerable, lack access to comprehensive sexual education. And this feeds into the vicious circle of reinforcing gender inequality for the individual girl and for society at large. And we are aware and we know that comprehensive sexual education is controversial. The growing anti-gender movement is challenging SRHR. And one of our long-term partners in North Macedonia gave one crude example just the other day when we had a conversation. They have fought for over 10 years to have SRHR included in the curriculum. And finally, the government had decided to launch a new education reform of the primary school, which entailed that comprehensive sexuality education became part of the curricula as an optional subject and available to children between the ages of 13 and 14. And it should also be noted that for children to attend these classes, however, they needed a written consent from their parents. However, just before the being passed, the anti-gender movement managed to stop this reform. They argued that the reform will sexualize children, and our partner said that they have spread false information, even false translation of international documents, and have manipulated to create more fear and panic. This kind of movement that's going on does not hinder women's organizations to continue to push for change and at the same time provide training when government failed. And around the world, women's organizations are in the forefront for fighting for women's, girls' and right to decide over their own bodies, just like Ms. Wandou just talked about. In Liberia, we support partners that when they arrange school clubs for girls to meet and discuss and raise their knowledge about sexual abuse and how to prevent pregnancies. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, a women's organization supports students and teachers to speak up against sexual harassment in schools and the problem of girls being forced to have sex with their teachers. We also have partner organizations in Armenia who conduct awareness raising sessions for women on sexual and reproductive health and rights, which then has a snowball effect, women spreading the word, engaging their fellows from their own and from other communities. The examples are countless, and women's organizations are doing an amazing job and play a decisive role providing sexual education at the same time as they're advocating that their governments step up to ensure the structural change that is so necessary. So in sum, there are many gaps and obstacles that need to overcome, and we should definitely put the women's movement first and in front when we decide how to move forward. And I would like to just bring up 3 points that they are bringing forward. And the first one is about restrictive laws, anti-gender movements, and stigma around SRHR are the big barriers and need to be challenged. And here, everyone needs to be active, from international actors and donors to the local communities. We know that we need to use smart strategies. Advocacy need to be adjusted depending on the context, and carefully targeting leaders, including religious and political, is a common entry point. And finally, as always, long-term sustainable funding for SRHR and women's organizations is the key. It's not complicated. It doesn't even take much for the international community to raise, because we're coming in at really, really low levels, but it's really the key for this issue to move forward. So I will stop here and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Petra, for sharing that important perspective about the importance of sexuality education, about the powerful description of how important that is for people, women, to be a whole person, to have both the knowledge and the right to decide over your own body, and for also sharing with us the kind of backlashes that your partner organizations are facing. I'm especially proud to be able to turn to Mozn Hassan, founder of Nazra for Feminist Studies, and more recently of the Doria Feminist Fund. Mozn, you received the Right Livelihood Award in 2016 for asserting the equality and rights of women in circumstances where they are subject to ongoing violence, abuse, and discrimination. You fostered the birth of a feminist movement across the MENA region, and you ensure through the Doria Fund now, which you started with the Right Livelihood Prize money, that this movement has access to more and better resources. You also established feminist schools through which young people learn about women's rights and are then mentored into politics. This once again directly contributes to a key target in SDG5 on gender equality, which is to ensure women's full participation, full and effective participation, and equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of decision making. So maybe you could share a little bit about that. How does education contribute to supporting young women's political participation? How do specific training and mentorship programs contribute to shaping these movements? And how can states be more effective in supporting these kinds of programs?
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me here. And I'm really so happy to be here with my family, the Right Livelihood family. And I think being with those important people sometimes makes me as a local activist so intimidated, but I'll try to be up to the position. I think it's really important to discuss education from the perspective of how to integrate gender within education, and the nice and amazing work Marthe and others are doing in this genderization of the work in the primary level and in the mainstream things. And at the same time, I think it's really important to focus on education as a tool for building movement and solidarity from a feminist perspective. And I do think that this is one of the most crucial things to understand, how to continue fighting for in a life and in a world which is really based on power dynamics and less spaces for women, and especially for feminist and alternative education and alternative thinking and values to exist. So this was one of our ideas in Mozn Hassan studies, to begin these feminist schools generally, because one of the most important things, like Petra was saying, that the world internationally are thinking, especially in our region, the Middle East, that we have lots of stereotypes about us, lots of stereotypes about what women need, and lots of power dynamics of understanding whom has the authority to speak with. So the international community most of the time are speaking with our governments, because they are ruling, but at the same time we know to what extent they are patriarchal, stereotypes, and other things. So having this alternative and parallel feminist education is important, first of all, for the narratives and the existence of the narratives of those young women and men in countries and societies which has lots of people speaking on behalf of them more than listening to them. So this is one of the things I think the feminist schools, and these other tools are important, especially in our region, which has been changing dramatically in the last 12 years, but people still love to see what they want to see, and it's easier for them to understand about this complicated region, and no one can ignore how complicated it is. So these feminist schools were space for intergenerational discussions, for space for thinking and building movements, and also transfer this to continue from our ideas, and this is one of the things KTK, as example, has been funding us for years on these issues, how we have been working on these feminist schools, but at the same time mentoring younger groups in different places to have the same tools. So we did it in our organization. We mentored groups in South Egypt. We also extended to other countries like Sudan after the revolution. So we found that many of the groups were, with our feminist knowledge and mentorship, they built in Sudan until they created this group, which is the Feminist Coalition, which has been fighting until today against the military coup. With these things and understanding, and strengthen themselves and create their own solidarity and understanding of their contextualization. The same has been happening on certain ideas which most of the time people are not speaking about, how to build feminist knowledge, narratives, and existence for those who are fighting to combat sexual violence in places and region which is so multi-layered, but also hard. You're not only fighting the so-called governments or authorities, you can find that those supposedly allies in the political movements are against you because you are introducing things they don't want to speak about, and some of them are perpetrators, as an example. At the same time, you are not in a good space with the general society, which likes the normality. All of these things, the process of feminist education, schools being mobile schools, tailored also what's political participation, because this is also, and we have been thinking about this from the beginning of the REA Feminist Fund as the first MENA fund for feminists, that most of the time the international donors love certain way of understanding women political participation, and it could be ended that they are supporting non-democratic, sometimes fascist women, more than investing on alternative strong women, because it is about the checklist. So we can find in all what was happening in our region for years that international donors are not accepting training women politicians on political ways. They love giving, I try all the time to be politically correct, but they love to give millions of dollars for communication skills or public speaking, but not working with those women on their constituency, the challenges they face, how to read the politics. And when the election is coming, suddenly they ask why we don't have women in this, when we know well that those women, they don't have bags from their communities. And we have also this experience of doing this mentoring on the ground for women politicians who are running for different elections, not only the parliamentarians, but also for syndicates and student movements. And this program in Nazra was one of the most challenging in funding, as example. So we have different meetings with donors telling us that why you are not doing awareness sessions for CEDAW in the governorates and other things. So I'm sorry, yes. See, I think this is one of the things also about the REA Feminist Fund, that we are trying to collect all these knowledge, solidarity, and understand and narratives to exist, to have this collectivity, because when movements exist, the rights could be existing and have people to work on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mozn. I'm sorry to be cutting you short. Such important points of building movement and solidarity, and you repeated your important call when you had an oral statement at the Human Rights Council last week of the funding to women's groups and grassroots groups to be on their own terms and not be donor directed, and obviously a lot needs to happen there. Because we were being so good in keeping our speaking times here, we now have the opportunity to have questions both from the room and from our online audience. We're trying to monitor that. And thank you again, Adriana, for joining us.
What a joy to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, and you asked your question, I think I'll have to repeat it for the microphone.
Okay, yeah.
Francesca.
Sure. Like, I have a question for Mozn actually. No, it's just like since the Korea Fund also gave funding to trans women and queer people. I was wondering how these women are, how these people are included into the planning of education programs, because that's also very important. So I was just like wondering this.
So the question is to Mozn Hassan about the Doria Fund that is also supporting trans and queer people and how they are included in the decision making around the attribution of funding. Is that correct?
Yeah, for Doria mainly it is a learning process. We have to understand this because having a MENA fund is something so hard. It's not something easy generally, because mainly it is about that. We always say the group of Doria that it is a hard mission to begin this culture. So one of the things about this is the participatory process and having queer people within the management system. So one of our coming co-directors, she's part of the community, but at the same time we strengthen on listening to the narratives and the understanding of people on the ground. But this is one of the cool things for Doria, that because of that we have been investing in the last year and before in the preparation time to listen to the groups, do this fiscal studies and needs assessments, because you couldn't, and this is one also about Doria, that it's coming from local experience, not international one. We have been in this positionality before when people thought that this is the right way forward. So we are trying not to have the same, so listening all the time and also giving people the place, the space and the respect to try. This is one of the things for including the different feminists in this group, in this funding process, is about mainly listen to what the local needs.
We have another question from the audience.
First of all, thank you very much to all the panelists for the very inspiring speeches. I was wondering, it's not directly to, but it's directly to all of you. I was wondering if you have one recommendation to states and governments on how to take stock from the best practices that you all represent in order to accelerate the achievement of the target of SDG5. What would this be? Like, what should they prioritize in your view?
So the question from our audience to all three panelists is your experience, or based on your experience of your successful work, what would be your recommendations to states and governments for what they should be doing in order to speed up the progress towards SDG 5?
Okay, maybe I can start. One recommendation I can make for the states is firstly to make sure that there is not discriminative or contradictory laws in terms of girls' education or girl marriage. For example, in Cameroon, we have 2 laws concerning marriage. Cameroon has ratified all the conventions, which means a girl before 18 could not or cannot never go to get to marriage. But we have a national document which is used for marriage for at the councils, which says that a girl of 15 and a boy of 18 can be married. So this is also a discriminative situation, and many people use that. Even if you report, you get to the police, you go to the law, but the court, but they tells you that, okay, the girl is already 15 and the parents agree, not the girl, but the parents. So it's difficult. For me, it's very important for the governments to make sure that we have traditional situations, but when it comes to laws, we can have the source of strength to make sure we can be against those situations girls are going on.
Petra, your recommendation to government?
Well, I think I'm going to take the opportunity to repeat the last point I said. You know, we know from experience in this room, we also know from research that the most important factor to move forward on primarily legislation against violence against women in the country is a free and independent women's movement. And today, less than 1% of ODA goes to women's rights organizations in conflict-affected countries. It's barely, I mean, like I said, it's pretty much nothing. And we need to have this conversation. We need to have it now. And we need to talk about these so-called risks that is often brought into the conversation when we talk about supporting local civil society organizations, and not only women's rights organizations, but local organizations. Because in my world, it's not a risk that the donors are taking. First of all, because the funding is so small, so it's really not a financial risk. If you look at your portfolio, it's not a financial risk, but primarily also, I think it's almost insulting towards human rights defenders and women human rights defenders in these contexts to talk about risk, because these people, or you both, Mozn and Marthe, you every day risk your life in working for human rights in the context where you are. And I think that's the risk that we should be talking about. But definitely my number one priority would be in funding these movements, these organizations, to push for change that will last, because change that is brought up from within the countries, within the communities, that's the change that will last. So that would be my recommendation for donors and decision makers.
Yeah, I want to second Petra for the thing about the movements thing and the funding. And also I do think that this holistic, what I like to say, that this constructive solidarity from the governments and the international community to local activists is really something important, because there is something about, like Petra said, about this risk the locals are facing, either being women human rights defenders, feminists, women's rights activists, or peace builders. And most of the time people not only don't care, but think that because we took this responsibility, so you have to pay the price. But without having this constructive solidarity for the prevention and the protection, because sometimes international solidarity and support, especially from certain governments, is really important for protection for people to continue doing this. And it doesn't mean that we are agents of some people, but we are international system, in this international system. So I think the funding is really important, but also giving these resources, listen to the narratives. One of the most challenging things for us as local activists, that people, international and in government levels, they are listening either to the diaspora academics. And this is something so problematic that those people, many of the time, that they're dealing with us as interlocutors, not as producers of knowledge, or for the international media, and less to have the keen to listen to us and take our knowledge and our experiences really in a respected way. And I'm always saying that I spend half of my time in the last 12 years talking to media and students in the international universities, and honestly, almost all of them didn't even care to share with me the findings.
And
Thank you very much.
I still have one. I think it's very important to invest more on the education in all the countries, and to take education like the first priority, instead of investing on arms and defense and so on. Is very important. It is very important to give a qualitative education to children, and to make sure they can build their capacities. They can also reflect on what they want to be in the future, instead of wasting money in terms of arms and conflicts and so on. Then also, to me, it's very important to involve civil society in the reflection platforms together with government, to make sure that we can plan together, and civil society can also have a word to say, not only to implement the policy which are already developed.
Thank you. We have one very nice audience question, and I would like to use that as the concluding question and ask the three of you to briefly comment. That's the question, speaking here together and also meeting you here in Geneva. What do you learn from each other?
Yes, what I learned from Hassan is the feminist schools, and I put it on my book because I think it's very important to have some. We have adolescent clubs, but I think we are not focusing on feminism, and this is what I learned. I learned also from her solidarity, from her also solidarity among the actors, to make sure that we can push the achievement of the SDGs. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Petra.
We learned a lot from us.
Yeah, let's see. Well, I mean, every time I have the honor of meeting I don't know if you should use the militarized term, but sisters in arms, I am in complete awe. You know, the solidarity and the sisterhood and the amazing strategies and ways of coping with the daily lives of working for women's rights, of working for feminist structures and with feminist analysis. And what I learn and what I'm reminded of every time is that I personally believe in, I believe in gender equality. I think that women and men should have equal rights and equal opportunities. But if someone were to suggest that we should hand over, you know, that's just for 10 years or 20 years, let women rights organization, feminist, young feminists be in charge of the world, I think I would sign up for that for sure and see. You know, I would take the risk of seeing, and then we could go back to complete gender equality. But that's what I learn every time I listen to you. So thank you so much for sharing your work. It means so much.
Yeah, I learned from Marthe their work mainly on education with adolescent girls, and this chart of anti-sexual harassment and sexual violence, because this is one of the things. I have a niece who's 16 years old, so I'm only thinking with her and her friends, how to have this bodily things. And from Petra, because yeah, I always learn from KTK how feminist solidarity is. They have been real supporters for us as a group, for many groups in our region in a hard time. So I'm always learning this feminist solidarity and being a different donor and having the partnership more the donor things. It's not only about now, it's about more than 20 years in a relationship. And I always learn from right livelihood people this solidarity, sweetness, and support, which always touched me from the day I became part of this family.
Well, thank you so much to the three of you, and we've been taking notes here. We are filming the whole program and putting out your different snippets of wisdom on social media and on our other channels and in our reports. And it is amazing to know that what you've been talking about here is just a small fraction of the work that you are doing, Mozn, that you are doing, Marthe, and that Tötterman is doing. So we hope that the panel inspired everyone online and in the warm room here at the Norwegian Refugee Council about your successful practices, which are practices that we know can be replicated and should be deserve to be replicated elsewhere. We also hope that you take away the conviction that progress towards the SDG5 could be achieved much more rapidly if we stand with those who are on the front lines of this movement. And it's therefore fundamental that states continue to support these activists, both politically and by granting them the resources they deserve to carry out their work. And that has been mentioned by our panelists. Because activists and civil society organizations like Mozn, like Marthe, like Tötterman are the key to achieving progress, not only on SDG5, but on all the sustainable development goals. And as Right Livelihood, we ask that this has to be reflected in all resolutions of the Human Rights Council. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you to the panelists for your inspiration. We wish you a good, successful, continued 50th Human Rights Council. Thank you.
Thank you.